Motagur had ordered an Israeli flag to be put on the Dome of the Rock.
Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Aaron Sokol, and you're watching Parsha Inspired. My guest today is Efraim Palvanov. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is the state of Israel and the return of the Jewish people the beginning of the redemption?
Yeah, I think we have to say that it is. When we look at everything that's going on around us and we compare that to the prophecies, the ancient prophecies that we have in Tanakh, starting with Tanakh and then going into Talmud, Midrash, Zohar, Kabbalistic texts, it's pretty clear that what's happening now is very much in line with what our prophets and sages said. Everything from the return of the Jewish people to Israel en masse. Today we have more Jews living in Israel than possibly ever in history. And we have more prosperity in Israel than ever in history. There are more shuls and yeshivas, batei midrash, than ever in history. So it very much looks like that it's what we call Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the first steps in the final redemption. And it's important to remember that our sages described that redemption process as a long process. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes time to get everybody back in the Holy Land and to build the infrastructure that's needed for all the Jewish people to be able to settle securely in the Holy Land. So we're definitely within that process. We can look more specifically at prophecies like Ezekiel, Yechezkel, chapters 38, 39, the famous Gog Magog prophecy. Ezekiel clearly says that before Gog Magog, before Mashiach comes, the Jewish people will already return to their holy land. And it says, Meshovevet Mecherev, they will come back after a great catastrophe, out of a great destruction. And after that, they will be able to reestablish a prosperous and powerful state, essentially, in the Holy Land. And Ezekiel says they will first be able to rebuild their he doesn't say state, but they will settle prosperously and securely in the land, and only then will the events of Gog and Magog take place. And of course, it mentions their Paras as one of the major allies of Gog in the final end of days events, and Paras is Persia, Iran. So when we look at even those specific prophecies, it's pretty clear that they are coming true right before our eyes. If you look at a work like Kolato, which is attributed to the teachings of the Vilna Gaon, Kolato says, when is the ingathering of the exiles at the very least fulfilled, or when has it begun? Then that you need 600,000 Jews in Israel, because that special number, 600,000, that's how many Jewish souls there were at Mount Sinai. And you see that number throughout Jewish texts, even halachic texts, right? There's certain halachot, Jewish laws that apply when 600,000 Jews are in one particular place. So the Kolato says that the ingathering of the exiles is already step one is accomplished with 600,000 Jews in Israel. And if you look at how many Jews were in Israel in May of 1948, when the state of Israel was announced, there were about 600,000 Jews in Israel, amazingly. So I think it's pretty clear when we look at everything all together, all the prophecies, that what we have today is definitely a fulfillment of prophecy. So we are absolutely, I believe, in that process.
Yes. So Zion has always been on the mind of the Jews. We've tried to return many, many times unsuccessfully. So how is it that this time that we've returned has gone through secular Zionism, which seems to be contrary to the way people would imagine the redemption would unfold?
Yeah, so I think there's a big misconception there. People think that Zionism is secular, but it's actually not. The origins of Zionism are 100% religious. So you could pinpoint the true father of modern Zionism as Rabbi Yehuda Alkalai, who was a Sephardic rabbi, one time chief rabbi of Semlin, Serbia. And he said all the way back in the 1830s and 1840s that he was partly inspired by the Damascus affair, which took place in 1840, and that just showed how anti-Semitism is not going away. And despite in the 1800s and the Age of Enlightenment and the egalitarianism and the emancipation of the Jewish people, which had already taken place across Europe and most of the world by then, and still the Damascus affair proved that the anti-Semitism is still very much there. The Jewish people are not free. They will always be persecuted in exile. And that was one of the major things that inspired him to essentially launch the Zionist movement. He created an organization for the settlement of Israel, and he wrote a manual called Goral Hashem, or Goral Adonai, the lot for God, where he actually laid out how the Jewish people can come back to the Holy Land and rebuild a prosperous kingdom there. And he's the one that first actually specified how we need to return to speaking Hebrew in our day-to-day language, because that's the only language that's going to unify us all. Right? The Hebrew was never a dead language. So another misconception, people say, oh, Hebrew was a dead language and the state of Israel revived it. It's not true. We've always used Hebrew. It was never a dead language. It was just a language that we reserved for prayers and holy texts and things like that. The rabbis always communicated in Hebrew because that was the one language that unified us all. So a Sephardic rabbi and an Ashkenazi rabbi who had different vernacular day-to-day languages, but could still write their Sfarim in the same Hebrew and communicate and send letters. All the rabbi letters that we have are pretty much in Hebrew because that was the one language that unified us. So Rav Yehuda Alkali said we have to go back to speaking Hebrew in a day-to-day basis like it was in ancient Israel, because that's the one language that unifies us. He says we have to purchase land in Israel piece by piece and build agricultural colonies and teach Jews, again, how to farm and work the land. And we have to take matters into our own hands and be in charge of our own prosperity and not be dependent on anybody else. So he created this manual. And actually, one of his congregants was Simon Leib Herzl, who's Theodor Herzl's grandfather. And Theodor Herzl, scholars believe, had a copy of that book that Rabbi Yehuda Alkali wrote. And so many of Herzl's ideas were not actually his ideas. He got them from Rabbi Yehuda Alkali, who was one of the chief rabbis in Serbia. So originally, the Zionist movement was 100% religious. Most of the rabbis, there were many other rabbis who were behind it, Rabbi Yehuda Bibas, Rabbi Kalisher. There were many rabbis in the 17 and 1800s that were talking about coming back to Israel. Many of the Hasidic rabbis, Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, even non-Hasidic rabbis, the Vilna Gaon's descendants and students called the Prushim came to Israel in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So this was actually originally entirely a religious movement. And the first Aliyah was made up of mostly religious people. And so we have to remember that Zionism actually didn't start off secular. It was eventually usurped by secular leadership, but it started off as a very religious movement. And Rabbi Yehuda Alkali wrote that based on a prophecy in the Zohar says that just like in the 600th year of Noah's life, the flood waters opened up, the Zohar says that the 6th century of the 6th millennium is a particularly auspicious time for the Jewish people to come back to Israel and bring about the redemption. So Rabbi Yehuda Alkali said, well, the 6th millennium of the 6th century is basically 1840, would be the year 5600. The 600th year of the 6th millennium is 1840. And Rabbi Yehuda Alkali said, we have 100 years to do this project. And he said, if we don't do it ourselves in the next 100 years, then there will be a massive catastrophe that will come upon us. And then we will return to Israel, like Ezekiel says, a nation that returns from a catastrophe. So Rabbi Yehuda Alkali predicted it very accurately 100 years before. And that's unfortunately what happened, where there was a Holocaust, there was a great catastrophe. And right after, the state of Israel is born. So again, the movement was actually not secular. It was a religious movement to begin with. And most of the early pioneers that came to Israel and drained the swamps and planted the forests and did all the fundamental infrastructure work were religious people.
You know, many religious people or even secular people are watching the show and in America, and they may have problems with what they perceive as Zionism. And this, what you're saying, the separation of Zionism and I guess the location called Israel, because Bar Kokhba tried to come back, and Nehemiah ben Chushiel, and like as you mentioned in 1697, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi or Hasid. So there was a sequence of people trying to do this and unsuccessfully doing so. And there's always been the question: how will the redemption unfold? Will there be a magical Mashiach moment? Like Rabbi Josh Wander, I've heard say, called the MMM, like that there's just a sudden flash and that all of a sudden everything is great, or there's a process. Now, we've tried doing this so many times and it didn't work. And this time it did work. And it somehow, many people seem to have a difficult time separating what they think Zionism is and what Eretz Yisrael is. I'm talking like the Torah, the Jewish Eretz Yisrael, where everybody wants to label Eretz Yisrael something. So maybe you could help the viewers separate, or maybe not. Maybe it's the same thing. So.
Okay, so in terms of the attempts in the past to create a state in Israel, it's not. I don't think it's true that there was never a successful attempt. There was, because after the Babylonian exile, they were able to come. The leaders at the time were able to come back and establish a semi-independent state originally under Persian authority and then under Greek authority, but actually under Egyptian Greek and then Seleucid Greek. But then the Maccabees, of course, got full independence and had a prosperous kingdom for about a century. So there were previous attempts to revive a Jewish kingdom state in the land of Israel were successful, including the case of the Maccabees. Bar Kokhba was also very close to being successful. He defeated the Romans. He did expel the Romans. They did clear the Temple Mount. They did start rebuilding the temple. He was so successful that Rabbi Akiva proclaimed him the presumptive Messiah, because nobody had ever gotten so close to fulfilling all the conditions of who Mashiach is or what Mashiach is supposed to accomplish. So it ultimately collapsed then, and Nehemiah ben Hushai also got very close. So there were previous attempts, and this one as well. This one has been the most successful, among the most successful. And again, it's still a very early, right? It hasn't even been 100 years for the state of Israel. So when you compare it to the Maccabees, for example, the Maccabee state, it lasted longer, than what we have so far. So time will tell the success of the state of Israel. I think we're at a critical point right now with everything that's going on in Israel, socially and politically, geopolitically. And hopefully this time will be successful. But there were previous moments in history where there was success in establishing Jewish prosperity and strength in the Holy Land, in comparison to non-Jewish peoples who tried to establish something and were not able to, right? No non-Jewish people, there have been so many who have conquered this land, and nobody was able to actually create anything lasting here. Not the Crusaders, not Saladin, not the British, not the Ottomans. It was mostly kind of dead and desolate, and it's only Jews who have ever been able to make something successful and prosperous here. And in terms of the second question of kind of differentiating between the state of Israel and the land of Israel, I think practically it doesn't matter so much, because if we compare, you can compare the state of Israel to the era of Judges, and I've written about this before. When we look at the biblical era of Judges, what was that exactly? The Shoftim. It was kind of like this. There was no king in Israel. There was no Davidic dynasty. There was no temple. There was like a Mishkan, but it was kind of like not even operational for a lot of that time. And what you had was Jewish people, or the Israelites, living in the Holy Land. And the theme in the book of Judges is that various oppressors would arise and oppress Israel, and then God would send a particular judge to fight off the oppressor. And when we look at the judges, they weren't necessarily religious, right? Half of them were not even described as righteous. They were kind of just military leaders, successful military leaders, but not religious. Some were, like Dvorah, of course, was a prophetess, but others were not. And others are described as kind of like wicked leaders too, but God gave them the strength to fight off Israel's oppressors. So I think the current period in the state of Israel is very similar to the Judges period, where there was no Davidic dynasty, there was no temple, there was a lot of oppression and fighting with Israel's neighbors, and there would be strong military leaders who would defeat Israel's oppressors. And kind of the repeating theme throughout, there's a refrain throughout the book of Judges that Israel would win, and the land would be peaceful for 20 years, 40 years, and then the next conflict would arise, and God would send a new judge. And I've even gone so far as to parallel the judges of Israel with the modern day prime ministers of Israel, who kind of serve a very similar function, where they're not necessarily religious or righteous, but they are strong military leaders. Many of them are former generals, veterans of the IDF, and they're able to save Israel from oppression, essentially, or guide Israel through difficult periods. And if you line them up, even, it's amazing. There were 15 judges. Our sages count 15 judges in the Judges period, from Yoshua till Samuel, Shmuel. And if you look at the prime ministers of Israel, they parallel really neatly to the judges. For example, the fourth judge in the judges period was Dvorah, who's the only woman on the list of judges. And the fourth prime minister of Israel was, of course, Golda Meir, who's the only woman in the list of prime ministers. And before Golda Meir, there was, I think, was Levi Eshkol, who served such a short period of time. He was like an interim prime minister, so he's not included in the list, in the official count of Israel's prime ministers. And before Dvorah mentions in her song a judge called Shamgar, but because he ruled for such a short period of time, the rabbis didn't include him in the list of 15 judges. So in both cases, you have the fourth prime minister or the fourth judge is a woman, and before her, there's an interim judge or prime minister who served for such a short period of time that he's not included. And many other overlaps between, if you actually study carefully, the 15 judges and the 15 so far we've had actually 14 prime ministers. So I've made the case that it took 15 judges in biblical times to go from coming to Israel initially with Yoshua to the Davidic dynasty and the temple. Will it take 15 prime ministers again this time to go from the start of the Geulah process till the return of the Davidic dynasty and the temple? So I think that's a very compelling possibility.
All the time of the Shoftim, they did not seek out a resting place for God, meaning that if we are in this time of the Shoftim, as you say, so we should be seeking out a resting place. Has there been other times in periods of history where we've reached this point and started to build the third temple, and how did that look?
Yeah, building the temple has always been like a ground up approach, meaning King Solomon undertook to build the temple. King David wanted to, and God told him, well, it's not going to be you, it's going to be your son. King Solomon was able to do it. And the Tanakh says that it was 480 years between the Exodus and the construction of the temple. And before that, there was this Mishkan, which was like a mobile sanctuary, right? And it spent most of its time in Shiloh, about 370 years in Shiloh, 369, 371, around 370 years in Shiloh. And then King Solomon was able to bring in essentially the Mishkan and its vessels into the temple, but it was done from the ground up. So it wasn't like the temple came down from heaven, like we say might happen with the third temple, that maybe the third temple was built by Hashem and comes down from heaven. But that's a midrashic thing. On the pshat, like halachically, we should be actually building the temple like King Solomon, like King David tried, and then like King Solomon did, and he used the resources available to him. He brought gold from Ophir, and he brought cedars of Lebanon from the north. He made important alliances with King Hiram. King Hiram sent artisans, he sent resources. So he was actually using all the resources available, making trade deals with his neighbors to get the resources necessary. So it was very much like a natural political process, right? He didn't just wait for the temple to fall from heaven. He took the initiative and he did the work that was necessary, and he got the resources that were necessary, and he made the trade deals that were necessary and the political alliances that were necessary to get this done. Something similar happened with Bar Kokhba, who actually, even if we don't want to skip one period, the second temple before Bar Kokhba, the second temple era was the same, where the leaders at the time started building. They went to Cyrus, they asked permission, and they got permission from Cyrus to go and build the temple, and they built it themselves. And Zerubbabel and Yoshua, the high priest, and Ezra and Nehemiah, that whole generation, and the last prophets, they actually got their hands dirty and built it. And there was opposition to it. If you remember, there were Samaritans, there were others who tried to get in the way of building the temple. And again, it required securing political alliances. It required trade deals and getting the resources necessary, and they did it. And then King Herod rebuilt it, of course. King Herod was the client king of Rome. And the famous or infamous story where he wanted to atone for his persecution of the rabbis. So he started this grand reconstruction project, and the sages approved it and said that if you haven't seen the temple of King Herod, you haven't seen a beautiful building at all, because it was so magnificent. So King Herod did it from the ground up, again, using Roman funds and political alliances. And then Bar Kokhba tried to do it as well, but unfortunately failed. Nehemiah tried to do it in the 7th century. So it was building the temple was always seen as something we need to do. It's in our hands. It's really like it's a mitzvah from the Torah that we have to create the temple and the temple vessels and serve Hashem. So we shouldn't be passive about it. We shouldn't be just waiting for, although there are midrashic opinions that say the third temple will come down from heaven. Realistically and practically, we shouldn't just be waiting passively. We have to actually do what we can to build the temple. It's in our hands to build it. And there are people doing it, like the Temple Institute has been trying to create the necessary conditions, and they're already building the vessels and models for it and training Kohanim and so on, which is amazing. I think that's what we should be doing. We should be preparing actively for the temple, third temple, and trying to create it. Yeah.
So would it be correct to say in 1967, when the who was it? I forget the person's name.
Motagur.
He yells out, "The Temple Mount is in our hand. The Temple Mount is in our hand." And at that very moment, they established what the Western Wall Heritage Foundation, and they said, Jews, you stay by the wall. And the Waqf was given ownership. Do you think that that was a fear of this fulfillment of prophecy? Does that fear, let me just finish, because I really think that this is why Iran is after Israel. Because they know that if we've returned, our next step is to build it. And if we do that, then it's game over. There's a theological problem. I mean, even though I think, I think in Surah 519, it does mention, and I've heard you say this, that, anybody who doesn't come is an idiot, is stupid, or something like that. But, meaning like there's a theological
the Quran
problem.
tells Moses tells the children of Israel that you have to go and possess your land because it was given to you. So if you don't take it, it's yours. You got to go and take it, or else somebody else will, So the Quran is also a Zionist text that says the children of Israel should be in the land of Israel.
So let me just sharpen the question. Is right now the debate of Temple Mount sovereignty, that is becoming more popular right now. People are talking about going. I myself have never gone up, just because I'm not clear on it. I want to listen to other people, and I want to make an informed decision. I want to know enough about it that I feel comfortable doing it, but I haven't done it yet. So I wanted to know, do you think that before we get to like the ideology of it, do you think that the theological problem right now for Christendom and Islam presented by Jews going up there is really like the core of really this whole war and anti-Semitic? Everybody's like feels everything we've described so far is pretty much in the deep conscious of the world. They all witnessed this.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning. Historically, in 1967, like you said, they took it, they gave it away, right? They just gave it up to the Jordanian, to the Waqf, for nothing, basically. Motagur had ordered an Israeli flag to be put on the Dome of the Rock. It was put up, and then Moshe Dayan saw it with his binoculars and immediately ordered for it to be taken down, saying, do you want to set the Middle East on fire? So Moshe Dayan, who was secular, was scared of the potential repercussions from the Arab world. But the truth is, probably nothing would have happened because Israel took it over fair and square. And the Arabs, basically Arab culture, Arab Muslim religion, it only understands strength. Okay? So like the Muslims, they're not allowed to make peace with the infidel unless the infidel is stronger. And so they make a temporary peace until they are strong enough to fight them off. Like the Muslim world Muslims see everything split. They divide up the world into the Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam. And if you're not in the world of Islam, you're the Dar al-Harb. You're in the world of war, of the sword. If you're not part of Islam, then we're going to fight you until you become Muslim. And they are only allowed to make peace with non-Muslims temporarily if they're not strong enough to defeat them. So any peace with Muslims is a temporary peace. Islam and the Arab world only understands strength. As long as you're stronger, they will be at peace with you. Once you're weak, they will destroy you, because the ultimate goal of Islam is an international global caliphate, to submit the whole world under Islam. That's what Islam literally means. Islam means submission. So when Israel capitulates to Arab demands, it's a sign of weakness. And the Arabs don't see that as, oh, we can make peace with these people, because their long-term goal is not to make peace with us. That's what a lot of the Western liberals don't understand. Islam does not allow to make peace with the infidel. At best, you get a temporary peace, at best. And that only happens if you're stronger. So every time we give something away, we capitulate. That's a win for them, and that only makes them stronger. It does not actually bring us peace. It's actually just makes us weaker, and that gives them the upper hand. And we have to be strong. That's the only way to maintain peace with them, not to give anything away. So when they gave away the Temple Mount, that was a huge disaster. At the 6-Day War, Israel was the dominant superpower in the Middle East. They could have kept the Temple Mount. Nobody would have said anything. So Moshe Dayan was worried about the repercussions, but he was completely wrong on that. Israel could have totally taken it. It was ours, fair and square. That's it. But they gave it up, I think, mainly out, like you suggested, out of cowardice. And the rabbinic authorities didn't help, because I think a lot of the rabbis were scared of, what does it mean that the Temple Mount is in our hands? Does that mean that we actually now have to start building the temple? And better to avoid those questions and those halachic issues and that responsibility, let's just give it away and not have to deal with it. We'll just wait for Mashiach to come. That's been kind of like the hashkafa, the galut hashkafa never left. They came to Israel, but they brought their galut hashkafa into Israel. So better not deal with it. Put up a sign that says, oh, Allah says you're not allowed to go to the Temple Mount, which is a complete lie. That's not true. That sign that stands there when you try to go to the Temple Mount and supposedly says a warning that halachically you're not supposed to go up, that's a complete lie. It's not true. And so I think it was like a cop-out, both by the secular authorities who were scared of the repercussions from the Arab world, and from the religious authorities who were just scared of the responsibility of what does it mean that the Temple Mount is in our hands. So they just gave it up. And then they maintained this policy that you're not supposed to go up the Temple Mount. But halachically, you're definitely allowed to go up the Temple Mount. And okay, there might be certain places where you're not allowed to go because of the impurity. Okay, but you can definitely go, like where they take you around on the tour around the perimeters. No problem to go there.
Yeah, just go to the mikveh first. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can go to the mikveh first. You can remove. We all have the tumat emet for sure, but you can. Yeah, I've written about it, going through all the halachic sources of even their halachic texts that describe like a corpse. Can you bring a corpse onto the Temple Mount? Well, yeah, in certain places you could, because having tumat emet doesn't apply in those places. So you can definitely go to most of the Temple Mount area, certainly the perimeter, and you have not violated anything. And of course, there's also a kind of like a funny, almost paradoxical thing where the argument is that if you go to the Temple Mount, to a place you're not allowed to go, then that's a potential karet, right? Like a spiritual excision. But it's also true that one of the penalties for not participating in Korban Pesach is karet. So by default, like if we're not bringing a Korban Pesach, it's like we're all karet anyways. It's also worth mentioning that there are halachic opinions that say today, because there's no temple, there's no kedusha there at all. And there are a minority of opinions that say you can freely walk anywhere you want and not have to worry about any penalty at all, any karet. So there are even those opinions.
I would not recommend.
I'm just saying the range of opinions.
If you go up as a religious Jew, there are police. They will escort you. I've watched the videos. I've done countless videos on this channel of complete walk-ups where people can see all the places. I had a video of Moshe David Tendler, the son-in-law of Moshe Feinstein, ascending and talking about the greatness of ascending. But the hot topic we've been talking about a lot on this channel, and that maybe you could shed some light on, is historically, have people been going up, and has the fear of building the temple always been our biggest obstacle?
Yeah, historically, people have always gone. The Rambam writes about it. The Rambam, when he left, first he fled Spain, then Morocco, and he actually tried to live in Israel. Didn't work. Then he settled in Egypt, where he became world renowned. But before he settled in Egypt, he visited Israel. He talks about going to the Temple Mount. So definitely the other travelers and rabbis have gone there. So people have always gone up the Temple Mount, for sure. And I think we need to go up the Temple Mount, because you were saying earlier that you've never gone. I think the importance of going up the Temple Mount is that we have to show that, like Arabait Be'adenim, we have to show that it's ours. If we don't show that we care about this place and that we believe that it's ours, if we just say, oh, like the Waqf can have it, they can administer it, then we're basically saying that it belongs to, we're essentially adding to their argument that it's theirs. If we truly believe that this is the center point of the cosmos, that this is the holiest point for the Jewish people, then we should be there. We should show that, no, this is our place and we are not ever going to give this up, and we need to be in charge of this place. And by the way, it's only if we're in charge of it that it can be an international house of prayer, like the prophet Ishayahu says, right? Isaiah chapter 56, Ishayahu says the third temple will be a Beit Tfilah lechol ha'amim. It'll be a house of prayer for the whole world. So we also have to change the narrative a little bit and explain to the world that the third temple is not for us. The third temple is for everybody. And so when some Christians and Muslims say, "Oh, they're trying to build this temple for their own rituals and whatever, they're going to get rid of the Dome of the Rock and all this," that's not the point. What we want to create is an international house of prayer that will be good for everybody, a place where Christians and Muslims and everybody from around the world can come there. It's going to be a place of unity and peace. Because right now the situation is that only Muslims are allowed to go there. So right now it's an apartheid situation, and the apartheid is being imposed by the Muslim authorities, where only Muslims are allowed to actually worship there and nobody else. I know things are getting a little bit better. Now there's certain Jewish prayers that are allowed there, but still you need like a police escort for it. I've been there. I've done it. I prayed Mincha and did Birkat Kohanim on the Temple Mount, but with a police escort. That's not how it's supposed to be. This is supposed to be an international house of prayer, an international house of peace, where we can all worship God together. So the Third Temple project is not a Jewish project. It's actually an international project that will benefit everybody. Because right now, only Muslims can do whatever they want over there. If we were to actually be in charge, everybody would be allowed to worship there. See what I mean? So it's beneficial for everybody, not just the Jews. It's important for the world, for the Jewish people to understand that, and for the world to understand that. Like Isaiah says, the third temple is a house of prayer for everybody. It's international. So it'll be beneficial for everybody if we take control. There shouldn't be a waqf. It should be under Jewish hands, of course, under proper kosher authorities that know what they're doing. And I think it's so important for us to actually show that it's ours. And Jewish presence on the Temple Mount is all the more important today. So I think everybody should be going. Yeah.
The absurdity of us conquering the land, getting up to the point and running away is just beyond me. This spot is not the spot of, it's even a question historically if the Dome of the Rock is even Islamic. It doesn't seem to be. I think I don't know enough about it. Maybe you know about it, but it seems like it's a possibly Christian edifice. Do you know the history of it?
Well, I mean, it was built by the Muslims, no question about that, but it's not a mosque. So some people misunderstand it. They think the Al-Aqsa Mosque is just next to it, right? Like kind of on the other end of the Temple Mount. Though the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque, and it was built to preserve the Temple of Solomon. I mean, they say there's an inscription inside that says it was specifically built over the site of the Temple of Solomon to preserve that place, because the Christians had previously used it, or the Byzantines had used it as like a dumping ground. It was like a garbage dump. And Nehemiah ben Hushiel in around 614 of the Common Era actually managed to expel the Byzantines, clear the Temple Mount, and that set the stage for the Muslims to conquer it a couple of decades later. And then they built the Dome of the Rock, partly to preserve the site of Solomon's temple. Although it had political overtones, because really it was a struggle among the Muslims, different dynasties, the Umayyads and others, whatever, that were fighting for control. And the leader at the time essentially needed a new capital for himself because Mecca was not accessible. So he chose Jerusalem to be the new capital. That's when Muslims started talking about Jerusalem as Al-Aqsa and as a holy place. Until then, for sure, everybody understood that Al-Aqsa is not Jerusalem. It's somewhere in Saudi Arabia. And to this day,
mosque, right?
Exactly. And to this day, you have Muslim scholars who admit that Al-Aqsa is in what is today Saudi Arabia. It was only later that it was associated with Jerusalem for political reasons to justify creating a new capital in Jerusalem. But originally, it was not holy to Muslims, and it was not identified as Al-Aqsa at all. Yeah, so that's a little bit of the history of the Dome of the Rock. It's interesting. I also spoke about, there is a prophecy in Daniel about a certain period of time. When the abomination is built on the Temple Mount, Daniel says there will be a certain amount of time 1290 years, 1335 years until the temple will be rebuilt. So if you look at when the Dome of the Rock was built around the year 690, again, question of when do you start counting from when it started to be built, from when it was finished. So if you add up the years, we get to like right now, where we are now. So that's one way of understanding Daniel's prophecy. If you count from the Dome of the Rock being completed somewhere around the year 700, and if you add the 1335 years of Daniel, about 1300 years later, we're right at the point where, if that's really what Daniel meant, so we might see the end of the abomination on the Temple Mount and replaced with the final third temple.
Amen. You know, the one of the arguments, I'll end with this last point. Maybe I'll give you the ending, but there's a question. One of the objections for going up and we said we'll talk about the halachic aspect of it, was that it seemed to be that there was a question of if we actually knew where the temple would be. But yet, from my research and from what I understand, there's endless sources, as you just described, saying that the place where the temple stood was most likely the surrounding area around the Dome of the Rock, meaning that was used as a marker. And in fact, Rav Avadia Yosef also, in a question that was brought to him about a person who is Jewish who was killed on the Temple Mount in a place where Jews should not go. So who should go bring him? And he said that a Kohen should go bring him out, because we know for certain that that place is the place of the Beit HaMikdash, which if that is true and that we know that for certain, then definitely the path that we go up to Temple Mount should be permissible. So yeah, that's what I had to say.
Yeah, I think the pshat, I think, is there are different opinions as to where exactly the temple stood. And but the Gemara, Mishnah, and Gemara say that in the second temple, since there was no Ark of the Covenant, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, would bring the incense on Yom Kippur and place it on the rock, the Eben Hashtiyah. And so it seems like it really was where the Dome of the Rock is now, because there's no other major huge rock on the temple. This is the rock. That's always been the rock. So I think that is the one, the Eben Hashtiyah. Now, that doesn't mean that the Dome of the Rock itself actually has to be destroyed. I think it's important to preserve it as a cultural icon, and let's say it's important to Muslims. So I don't think we have to have this approach where we have to destroy the Dome of the Rock. I don't think that's the approach.
God forbid, we could move it.
You can move it. You can definitely move it. It could be preserved. And again, according to those opinions, that where the temple might be a little bit off center, so it could be somewhere else. But even if it was right there on that, which I think it was, right where the rock is, again, the Dome of the Rock itself does not have to be destroyed. So it's another misconception. People think that Jews are trying to destroy the Dome of the Rock. They're going to blow it up or whatever. I don't think that's required at all. We should preserve it as an important kind of historical, cultural edifice. And it could certainly just be kind of moved over and again replaced with, or we can put an international house of prayer that would be special to everybody and not just one particular people, because this is the holy land ultimately for everybody. And interestingly, also Jeremiah says in his prophecies, Yirmiyahu, that a day will come when the Notzrim will say, let us go up to Zion together. And it says Notzrim, which in Jeremiah's time did not mean a Christian because they didn't exist yet. But prophetically, Notzrim became the term for Christians. So I think that's another prophecy coming true today, where you do have so much Christian support for this project, for temple, for Zionism, and so on. And I think that's also, going back to our first question, a fulfillment of prophecy, that there are Notzrim now who are saying, let us come and help the Jews, and let us go and ascend Zion and work towards ending the Galut and rebuilding the temple. So I think it's just another prophecy that's connected to the Temple Mount, to Zion, that we're seeing fulfilled right before our eyes today.
Thank you so much. Isaiah 55 that we read in synagogue this week ends, verse 5 ends with that we are Pe'ercha, we are God's crown, and 10 Gentiles will hang on the hem of the shirt of the Jew and say, Nelchem echem, let us go with you, ki shamanu Elokim imachem, we have heard that God is with you. Today the Jewish people have returned, half the Jews have returned to the land. The land once again is giving forth its fruit, like it says, Va'am pechem titein pri, the branch will give forth its fruit for the Jewish people, because they are sure to come. Thank you so much for joining us. Please lead us out with a blessing.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Rabbi. The blessing that I give in the spirit of the conversation that we had, that we are all going to merit to see genuine Geula, God willing, and we're going to have world peace and prosperity for everybody, because that's the whole point. Again, Geula, the final redemption, it's not a redemption for the Jewish people. It's a redemption for the whole world. And I think everybody on this planet, Jew and Gentile, we're all sick of the misery and the persecution and the slavery that we're all in, the techno slavery, the financial issues, like all the terrible things that are going on, that we are all globally suffering, the wars and the lies and the misinformation. I think everybody is yearning for peace and prosperity. And so the blessing that I would love to end with is that the entire world merits to see the Geula, so that we all have peace and prosperity for every single man, woman, and child on the planet. And like Isaiah says, the final temple will be a temple, an international house of prayer and peace for everybody, God willing. Thank you very
Efraim
much.
Palvanov, thank you so much. Everybody, please check out his channel. I'll leave a link in the description. From the holy city of Beit Shemesh, Shalom.